So since we've come through graduation, here's a graduation story I came across. End of school year. So there's this kid. He's a freshman in college, and he blows off the. Yeah, I thought I was there already. He blows off the freshman year of college. You know, he goes to college and he doesn't study. He doesn't do the stuff he's supposed to. He blows all his money, squanders all his money. Didn't get good grades or anything like that. There we go. Thank you, Tom. And anything like that. And so when he got home from college that freshman year, after blowing the whole thing off, his parents said, "Listen," and wisely so. They said, "Listen, if you want to go to college, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. We're not going to spend money like this. That's not going to happen again." So kudos to mom and dad for doing that. So he gets a job, and he's working that summer. Well, the family's going to take a summer vacation, and this year happened to be the year that they went to Greece, and so the whole family goes to Greece on a vacation, and he's left home, part of his punishment, to work and pay for college, right? So they get to Greece, and his mom decided to get a postcard and send a postcard home to him. And she wrote on the postcard, "Dear son, today we stood on the mountains where ancient Spartan women sacrificed their defective children. Wish you were here." I just thought, yeah. As a dad, that works. Okay, today we're starting a 6-week series, sub-series, from our theme of one another. We've been talking all year about one another, about serving one another, about praying for one another, about bearing with one another, about submitting, all these things to one another. It's about us. Well, last year was about how to be as a follower of Jesus. So this year it's about one another. So this is a sub-series, a 6-week sub-series. I preached this a couple years ago. But what I did is we did it in this early spring, and a lot of snowbirds weren't here. Like I'm not pointing finger. I'm pointing fingers. Anyway, so I thought, we really all need to hear this. So I decided to do it again. And this series, though, I don't repeat sermons very often. So this is a little unusual. But this series speaks to our culture. In fact, this speaks against. We run against the grain of our culture. We're like fish swimming upstream when it comes to culture. How many know that? That's the church. The church is countercultural in many, many ways. And a lot of what's going on in our culture today is opposite what the Word of God says. And so, for example, Francis Schaeffer. Anybody ever hear of Francis Schaeffer? Okay, read him. He was back in the day. He was a well-written. He was a thinker, forward thinker in the early church. In fact, in 1955, he developed the first commune for wayward, wandering Christians, and he had a lot of stuff. And one of the things he said was this. He said, "Tell me what the world is saying today, and I'll tell you what the church will be saying in 7 years." Now let's just make that, instead of 7 years, even say 10 years. You think about that. You think about what was being said 7, 10 years ago, and where is the church today? Now, with that as a backdrop, I think you probably understand that the current culture, and hopefully you agree with me, the current culture is all about who? Me, right? Me. It's all about me. It's about humanism. It's about man-centered. It's about my needs. The truth is as I say it is. This is my deeply held belief, and so therefore I can't be wrong, and all of that stuff. And now we're a whole generation in the church saying the same thing. I mean, 10 years ago we heard that. We're hearing that in the church. We're hearing churches are being built around people's felt needs, about what helps you, about therapeutic this or therapeutic that, or there's many churches. And I'm not saying those things are wrong. They're meeting needs of people. I'm not saying they're all wrong. But all of a sudden it goes to me, my needs, help me, and this and this. Newsflash. The church isn't about you and me. It's not about us. It's not so much about God showing up for us, is that we're here for God. We're here to walk with God, work with God. Say that. Say we're here for God with me, okay? We're here for God. That's what we're here for. So many people think God is here for us. He's my personal genie in a bottle. I'm sorry, he's not. He's not. So, and because we're here for God, in these next, we're going to get to these things in the next 6 weeks, and it's going to be about us. It's about us. I'm not going to talk about special issues you have or whatever, but I'm going to talk about us as a church. And that's why we're calling it This Is What We Do series. And while we're about, the church, I really think we're about vertical relationship, right? Vertical, us and God, me and God. And that's a good thing, right? That's our relationship with God is really important. It's important that we're proclaiming the Word of God. We're exalting Christ in the church, and that God should be made first and highest and the most and the best. And that He should be the longing and the affections of our hearts and all of that. That's vertical. That's vertical stuff here. But I think, you ever see a couple who's maybe engaged or got married, and they come home from the honeymoon, and they're just so, in a sick way, they're just so into each other. Oh, be still my heart. And it's just kind of gross. It's just, for those of us, anyway, they're so into. Sometimes I get concerned that sometimes we can be so vertically minded. And it's right, it's biblical, but I'm concerned that sometimes we're that couple. We're so vertically minded. We got our thing with me and God, I do this with God, me and God this, oh, me and God that, me and God, and His Word and His worship and all this. There are churches that neglect the vertical, and they're horizontal they're all about lost people, about getting those people who don't know Jesus, to make sure that they know Jesus. And my concern is that we don't fall into the opposite extreme. You can be so vertical, but not horizontal. You can be so horizontal, but not vertical. You know what I'm saying here? So I hope we're not like my dad always used to say at the barber shop. He'd say, that guy is so heavenly minded, he's no earthly good. And I don't want us to get that way. But at the same time, I don't want us to be so earthly minded, we're no heavenly good either. So there's this balance. And so for most of us, I'm a pastor. My ministry is my vocation. So most of us don't have that. Most of us have ministries, maybe Daryl at work, ministry to one-on-one with people. And most of us maybe have a Bible study or have something else that we do. But for most of us, it's right here. Most of us, we're here. We're on Sundays. We come together. We have Sunday school. We have worship together. We do this thing. Our thing is right here. And so, we're God's people, and we're living vertically on a mission for Him, which is horizontal. And that's the cross of Christ, isn't it? It's the cross of Christ. So you can't have the cross of Christ and be just so vertical. You got to have vertical and horizontal. And so what do? We have 3 things that are coming your way over the next 6 weeks, like I said. And the first part is this: we welcome without judgment. Part 1 next week is, of course, welcome without judgment. Part 2, which makes total sense. It's really good. I'm tracking on that. And that's what I want us to be about. I want CFC to be a place, and think about this, that no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter what you have, no matter what you look like, no matter what your darkest secret is, no matter what, darkest secret that the public knows, no matter what it is, this is the place that you're welcome without judgment. So with that, turn to Luke chapter 7. And as you get there, as you're turning there, I'm going to be doing some more talking. Here's a fill in the blank. First blank is welcome. Welcome without judgment. What does welcome mean? Welcome means received with pleasure and hospitality into one's company or home, and then communicating that with them. Don't we want everybody to feel welcome that comes here? Don't we want people to feel welcome? Anybody? Yeah. Good. I got one person listening. Thank you for listening, Kathy. I really appreciate it. we do. We want everybody to feel welcome when they come. And don't you want them to feel like we're thrilled with their decision to come and worship with us and come and spend time with us and grow with us and learn with us? And I think so. And I don't think anybody was here the very first Sunday this church opened its doors. Esther, you weren't here the very first Sunday this church. No. I don't think anybody was here The very first Sunday. So that tells me, that means that every one of us was a visitor at one time, and you were welcomed. Right? Everyone here was a visitor at one time. You were welcomed. How do I know that? You're still here. Right? If you weren't welcome, you wouldn't be here, you know? And so welcome. Here's the key. Welcome without judgment. What is judgment? Judgment means this: the forming of an opinion, estimate, notion, or conclusion as from circumstances presented to the mind. Thank you, dictionary.com. That's the dictionary's definition. Here's Tim's definition for us, pertaining to us. A negative assessment of another person based upon a superficial or shallow sense of superiority. In other words, I take a quick look at you and I go, snap, 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 snap. I think I might be better than you because I think I might be better than you. Then I'm judging you, and because I'm judging you, I can't welcome you. Does that make sense? And that's wrong. I'm at both campuses pretty well every week, and let me just say, I don't see this. I need to tell you, I don't think you'll like this. I'm not seeing this, at least not to me, but then again, when I was a kid, I was one way to mom and dad, and I was another way to my brothers and sisters, or my brothers, right? And so we can do that, you know. Oh, Tim's not here right now, you know, so I hope it doesn't happen. But so I don't want you to take this necessarily as a rebuke or a corrective or anything like that. But it's just something I really think we need to make sure we get right. We get this right. I tell other pastors, I tell other people I know how grateful and how blessed Kathy and I have been to be ministering alongside of you for 21 years, and that we can do it with longevity. You know, that just, you know, I believe we're going to be more for the Lord in 2019 and beyond if we can get these types of things right. Welcoming people without judgment. So, I want us to look at a story in the life of Jesus, and I think Luke 7, but before we get to that, let's do some background. Let's go back a little bit and catch you up. I think context makes a good difference here. Luke chapter 6 here, verse 37, we see Jesus is, in fact, take a look at what Jesus is talking about here. Judge not. Remember, welcome without judgment. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use it will be measured back to you. Anybody concerned about this at all? The way you and I measure people, the harshness, the lack of grace, the lack of mercy, and so on, will be measured back to us. These are Jesus' words, not mine. I didn't write this stuff. In fact, James 2:13 tells us this. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy, I like this. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Here Jesus is saying the same thing. Judgment is merciless to the one who shows no mercy. The same measure that you and I use with other people is going to be used on you and me. How does that make you feel? When you think about conversations, when you think about relationships, when you think about things you've had in the past week, past month, past year. See, I think we all have, at some levels, an incredible tendency to form shallow opinions of other people based on our mistaken notion of our superiority, that we have something over people, especially people who aren't in the church, especially people who aren't Christians. Somehow, I'm not saying every one of us does it. I'm not saying every one of us does it all the time, but I think to some degrees we do this thing. And Jesus is teaching on that. He's talking about knowing someone by the fruit. Later on, we look at this. He talks about knowing somebody in verse 43 by the fruit they bear. So we do have to do some judgment, by the fruit, and I'll get to that later about that. Then he talks about building a house on a rock, and then we get to chapter 7 of Luke 7, and this centurion comes to him and says, I got a servant that's really sick, and follow this. Jesus is talking about all this stuff. I got a centurion really sick, and Jesus said, well, I'll come to your house and I'll take care of that. And the centurion says, wait a minute, I understand authority. I understand headship. I understand leadership. Just say the word and it's done. I know how that works. And Jesus goes, whoa, wow, you blow my mind. This guy's got more faith than I've seen in all of Israel. Of course, this is paraphrased, but he's got more faith than I've seen in all of Israel. And then going on, he raises, in verse 11 of chapter 7, he raises a widow's son from the dead. And he's just really blowing people's minds on this. And then verse 18, he's talking about the ministry of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is really going to get his head chopped off, and he's having a really bad day. And no, that's a bad day, right? And so he sends his disciples to see Jesus and said, hey, find out if he's the real deal and if this is really who he says he is, and so on. So they go to do that. And then he comes to chapter 7, verse 31. We come to this real, unusual, we come to this sentence. It says, to what then shall I compare men of this generation? And what are they like? They're like children who sit in the marketplace and call to one another, and they say, we played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not weep. Anybody have any idea what he's talking about there? When you just read a verse and you don't look at the context, it's really hard to know. What are you talking about there? So it's not that obvious, so let's go on. Verse 33, he says this, and we get better understanding. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. In other words, the problem with most people is they're never satisfied. You know, you've got this guy who's got this ministry, and he's like this, and he teaches like this, and he leads in this way, and you're not happy with this guy. This is how John the Baptist was doing this. Fortunately, here we have a heart for something better than that. But one thing that makes it really hard for us is to persevere together is when we judge one another. And if we're hard on the family, I'm not saying that we're nailing each other every Sunday or anything like that, but and I'm talking about the greater church here. I'm not talking about CFC necessarily, but we're part of the greater church. And as I look at the greater church today, there's a lot of this assessing and a lot of this judging. And if we're hard on that, how are we with the people outside? How are we with the people who don't know Jesus yet? You know, and I think that's not a good thing. You know, always taking this line of superiority and always looking down our noses and assessing other people in view of how we wrongly perceive ourselves, that we've got it together and you need to get it together. As you know, Jesus said, man, John the Baptist came and he ate grasshoppers and locusts and lived in the desert, and you thought he was crazy. I came and just hung out with you guys, and I partied with you guys, and you don't like that either. Maybe party's a strong word, I don't know. But we know he ate with sinners, right? And he talked to prostitutes, right? All that to get to a long story. That was a long intro, I guess. Here's the message. First thing to fill in your blank, Luke chapter 7, 36. First thing is Jesus welcomes all who come to him. That's important to know. He welcomes all who come to him. How do we know that? Well, is in the Bible. Let's take a look. Verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. Now remember what a Pharisee is like. A Pharisee, they were the worst. They were legalistic. They were rough on other people. And Jesus, in fact, if you want to read about what Jesus thought about Pharisees, look at Matthew chapter 23, and you can find out what Jesus thought about Pharisees. He calls them blind guides. Think about that. How would you like to have a blind guide? Where's that going to take you, right? And then he says, they're whitewashed tombs, meaning you painted yourself up to look good on the outside, but on the inside, you're full of dead man's bones, he says. And he goes on and says, you Pharisees, you travel over land to sea to win one convert, and when you do win a convert, you make them twice the sons of hell that you are. And then he gives them the 7 woes, and what the woe basically means calamity has fallen or is about to fall for serious judgment on you. So Jesus is not a huge fan of Pharisees, okay? So here we go, Luke 30. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house, took his place at the table. Remember, this comes after his assessment of Pharisees, his woes to the Pharisees. And one of them's like, hey, you want to come to my house? And what's amazing to me is he goes. He goes. That reminds me that Jesus loves everybody. He might have despised the Pharisees' system and their awful legalism and their false religiosity, but he didn't despise the individual. He loved everyone. That's so important for us to remember. I may not like Sam's political persuasion. I may not like, something that Larry's banjo. That doesn't mean I don't like Larry or I don't like Sam. You know what I'm saying? We need to start seeing people through the eyes of Jesus and not through what our preferences are and not what we think that we're so high and mighty or that we got it all together. Because I'm going to tell you something. We don't have it all together. We don't. We're working on it, but we don't have it all together. And I think it's really cool that one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to come eat with him in his home, and he went into the Pharisee's home. Now, having somebody to your house is a pretty big deal back then. And the Pharisee didn't say, Jesus, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee and talk about this. He didn't say that at all. He said, come to my house for a home-cooked meal. Imagine what it took for his wife to slaughter the goat and to have it's a big deal. So he does. It's personal. It was personal to give it to invitation to Jesus, and it was personal for Jesus to accept it. When one of the persons asked him, and it's interesting, Jesus doesn't judge. He just gladly accepts the invitation and goes, because I believe Jesus is seeing the picture way bigger than the now. Right now, so often we see what's happening right now, and we get clouded with this right here, instead of saying it's about the kingdom. It's not about this right here. It's not about, what's going on. It's about the kingdom, building the kingdom. Verse 37, the story changes a little bit. It says this, and behold, now that's Bible talk for, now watch this. Watch this. Check this out. So it said, Jesus is reclining at the table and says, and behold, a woman of the city. I want you to understand that is not very flattering talk, okay? That is not a flat, it's basically saying she's a woman of the streets. It says, behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. Luke is being very kind here. He's not using the word prostitute, but that's what she was. She was a woman of the city. She was a sinner. That's what she was. She was a prostitute. And so you have this, think about this. You're in the home of this self-righteous, high and mighty, super religious person, superior Pharisee with Jesus hanging out, and this woman comes in. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. So the question is, was this woman invited or was she not invited? Invited? Not invited, no. So you think about the culture, you think about what happens. So she wants what Jesus has to offer. She knows where Jesus is, and she's desperate. And she goes to superstar religious guy's house, breaks protocol, no invitation, and walks right in, and she's a prostitute. Notice, it says, she brought an alabaster flask of ointment. So here's this lady standing there, and later we'll see how Jesus welcomes her. I'll get to that next week. I'm going to leave you hanging on this one for this week. But this is absolutely essential for you and me and us here at CFC, that this is what we do. We welcome whoever wants to be here. And one of the things I heard earlier this year from an individual during the week, this person said, Tim, I came to your church, and I've had something happen that has never happened to me before in a church. And I'm going, really? Okay. Pastors love to hear that, cut to the chase. And he said, I had somebody come up and introduce themselves and welcome me and thank me for being here. He said, I've never had anybody treat me that way. I've gone to churches and no one's talked to me. I've done that before too. But he said, I had somebody come up, and one of the things I appreciate about you people is that I've had more people say, I just felt welcomed. I've had people say, I felt loved there. And that is what we want. And we want to make sure we get that right. So this is a place where whoever wants to be here can be here. There's no person who looks wrong. There's no person who acts wrong. There's no person who has a wrong story. There's no person who has the wrong race. There's no person with the wrong background. There's no person who's wrong for us. And that's challenging because there's people out there that we can't identify with, that we might struggle with. And can you say, I welcome them to worship with me and find Jesus and take this journey that Jesus has for us? I think this is good because what we have in common is much greater than anything that can separate us. And it doesn't matter how you look. It doesn't matter what you think of yourself or how others might superficially judge you. It doesn't matter. This is a place where you have to experience, and we are determined that people will experience that they're welcomed without judgment. And that is more difficult. Think about applying that. We went to Sam and Kathy and I were at a great conference 2 weeks ago now. And it was just talking about the whole gender change and the whole transgender and all that stuff. And I was just thinking about us. How would we respond? I've had people say, Tim, how are you going to respond when somebody, a gay couple comes here? You know, those are things to think about. And my hope is that we still welcome them. If people want to be on a journey to Jesus Christ, we get beyond this right here and get to this right here and help them walk on that journey. We need to get to the place where this is so important and so deeply ingrained upon our hearts that it's just naturally what we do. We just welcome people regardless of anything that would cause people who don't know Jesus maybe to feel like we're judging them. And so I'm going to finish this section up next week. But right now, I have a video, and I hope this video turns out. It didn't turn out in Auburn way, but check this out to help cement this into your...
Hey, kid. You got to get down. Come on.